Morning thoughts. The source. Nothing is ever started by nothing, and nothing ever happens on its own. There is always a source or an initiator. Everything created contains material from different sources. Our existence is not a form of chance happening. There was a source. The thoughts we think have a source. What is the source of your choices? You think you choose the path you're on, but something or someone chose for you. Who was it? My name is Zibuse L Kunene. Come with me on the journey to empowered thinking. On this episode, the artwork is by Nelson Makamo, and it's beautiful. You should check out the Instagram handle, or he's also on X as Nelson Makamo. But check it out. You will love his work. Getting into the morning thoughts. We are often deceived into thinking that we are our own people, that we don't need anyone, that we don't need anything, that we can exist by ourselves, and that no one else matters. We think we are completely original. We think that our thoughts are completely original. We think that the values and principles that we hold in our lives are completely original, that we are the source of it all. But nothing could be further from the truth, because everything has a source. And if we trace back, we will see or we'll find that specific source. It's not where we always think we can find the source, where we find it, but it is in those surprising places. I remember my late uncle. For the longest time, I didn't learn anything. Well, let me rephrase, not necessarily learn. He didn't teach me anything. And that's because I'd always kind of taken him for granted, because most of the time he was in a state. And I remember this one day we were having a conversation and he said something so profound and I missed it. And then he says, "Do you know what that means?" And then I said, "No." And then he explained to me. And that lesson has stayed with me long after his death. And it stayed with me, one, because it was profound, two, because it came from him. And then thirdly, because I yearned to learn more of what he knew, of what he could teach if he were to teach, what he could impart if he just took the time to say, "Come here, let me sit with you." And if I had the time and the respect to sit with him and say, "Let's talk, generally, let's talk," and got to know who he is beyond the exterior that we saw. And just to stay on that, one thing that I remember about him is that in the last days after actually he was buried, my cousins and I started talking about him. And what came out was, after his twin sister, my aunt, had passed, he had lived with the pain. And because he had lived with the pain, um, it was difficult for him to just stay sober. And so what he decided to do was just keep in the path that he was on. He just kept on drinking, kept on doing so many things. He was basically on a self-destructive path until, well, he was on that path and reached the destination that he had intended. And so The source of my wisdom, the source of my knowledge can also be traced back to him. The source of my intellect can be traced back to some of the most unlikely sources. And therefore, it is unrealistic for anyone to just think they are the source. It is unrealistic for them to believe that they've always been the source of everything. Because I tell you this, when a child is born, they're born into a family, but they're also born into a society, they're born into an environment. And that environment has factors, that environment has an influence over how the child gets to grow up, over the things that child gets to think about, over the things that child gets to choose eventually. And then you have that child when they're all grown up and they've become something else. And then they say, hey, I am me. I am the source. I am the boss. And everything comes from me. But in truth, when somebody says that, we know they just do not want to acknowledge the people with whom they exist. It's similar to dating. When you're dating someone and you are engaging in a conversation with them, you're not just engaging in a conversation with that specific person, but you are engaging in a conversation with a tribe of people behind them. But you are engaging with so many people who have influenced them, who have shaped their thinking and their belief system. And so for you to just think, I am the source, is nothing but folly. So, who is your source? What is your source? Where does that source come from? If you take the time and you think about it, you will find it. Because all of us get to the point where we find the source, wherever your source may be. And if you want to know who mine is, I won't tell you now. But the source is bigger than all of us. This is Zibuse L Kunene. Thank you for tuning in.